Hello, this is Dr. Eric Bricker, and welcome to the How to Sell in Healthcare podcast. Today's topic is how to read people. Now, this is based upon an approach that I certainly did not invent, and it is sometimes referred to as the 4 colors approach, and it is sometimes referred to as the communication styles approach. But I learned this over 20 years ago, and you can find it on the internet, and I have found it to be true, and I have found it to be very helpful in my interactions during the sales process. Number one, in actual sales meetings and sales presentations, because the way that you're going to answer a question and interact with a person is going to be dictated by the type of color that they are. And there are 4 major colors, and those colors identify a sort of a persona, if you will. And those colors are red, green, yellow, and blue. And you could think of those 4 colors as 4 squares, and those 4 squares can then be made into a matrix. So you put the 4 squares together to make one bigger square with each of the 4 squares in a corner. You get the idea. Now, what you're going to do is on the left-hand side of those, you're going to have 2 labels. The top row is going to be labeled active, and the bottom row is going to be labeled passive. And then for the 2 columns, they are going to be labeled task-oriented and relationship-oriented. So you essentially have a combination of 4. You've got a matrix that you fill these 4 colors in. So you're going to have active and task-oriented. That is red. You're going to have active and relationship-oriented. That is green. You're going to have passive and task-oriented. That is yellow. And you're going to have passive and relationship-oriented, and that is blue. And we're going to go through each of those colors now. So the reds, the active, task-oriented people, are also known as the drivers, okay? And these are people who love to get stuff done. Now, they oftentimes are the leaders. They oftentimes are in positions of leadership. CEOs are oftentimes reds. Heads of sales are oftentimes reds. Heads of any department are oftentimes reds. Reds are motivated by power. That's why they're in control, because that is what kind of gets them going in the morning, is power. It's control. Reds love to be in control, because being in control allows them to get the stuff done that they want to get done. Next, you have, what kind of car would a red drive? A red would drive a pickup truck, because they love getting stuff done, for hauling stuff around, for just driving over problems. They don't drive around problems, they drive over problems. Okay, what kind of dog would they have? They would probably have like a German Shepherd, because they want control. And it would be a highly trained German Shepherd. And that German Shepherd would also be good at controlling the situation. All right. Now, what do reds really hate? They hate slowness. They hate indecision. So, if there's one thing that will get a red excited, it is to be able to make decisions quickly and to get going. Now, reds tend to not be concerned with other people's feelings. They're not bad people. A lot of times, it just doesn't cross their mind. They're not going out of their way. Sometimes they're classified as a jerk. They're not going out of their way to be a jerk many of the times. Many times, they just, doesn't even cross their mind. Okay. They, sort of along with that, they tend to have a weakness in empathy, putting themselves in another person's position, seeing something from another person's perspective. They kind of, it's like, they tend to be fairly high ego people. Again, All four of these colors are not better or worse. I mean, certainly reds are wonderful people. Without reds, we would never get anything done. We need to get stuff done in a company or in sales or in the world, right? So that's incredibly valuable. All right, now let's move on to the greens. The greens are active and relationship oriented. So greens tend to be, they are the life of the party. So they tend to be very enthusiastic. They're outgoing. They are the extroverts. So the red are the drivers and the green are the extroverts. And extroverts are motivated by attention. They're motivated by fame. They're motivated by popularity. They're motivated by recognition. Now, what kind of car would a green drive? They'd probably drive some sort of flashy convertible that was bright red. It's like, hey, notice me. What type of dog would a green have? They would have some sort of like designer multi-poo that might even have its with like some sort of like fancy fur cut with bows in it that you take around in your purse, right? So when you think of a green, you think of like a Hollywood celebrity. These are prototypical greens. In a company, the greens are often the salespeople, Joe and Jane personality. They love to talk. Greens love to talk. They tend to be very fashionable. They tend to wear clothing that draws attention. They love being positive. They love enthusiasm. They love being around other enthusiastic people. Now, what tends to be the thing that greens do not like? What is their weakness? Their weakness is attention to detail. Greens hate the details, right? Because that's task-oriented. They're like details. I'm a relationship guy. I'm a relationship woman. Okay, so you get the point. Next, we move on to yellows. And yellows are the passive task-oriented people. Now, these people tend to be computer programmers. They oftentimes have clerical positions. They are incredibly organized. They love details. They tend to be on, not always, but they tend to be on the quieter side. And they tend to be quite studious. They tend to be incredibly smart people. Yellows are motivated by being right. So we know reds are motivated by being control. Greens are motivated by being popular. Yellows are motivated by being right. They love to be right. They can't stand to be wrong. Because they can't stand to be wrong, yellows hate to be rushed because they want to take their time in their decision so that they can make the right decision. They do not want to make the wrong decision at all costs. Now, so to that end, their weakness is they tend to be slow because the time pressure of business is not of their primary motivation. Their primary motivation is correctness, not movement. And so a lot of times yellows will get into analysis paralysis. Okay, so reds and yellows get along great because reds want to get stuff done and they will lean on the yellows to make sure that the stuff gets done correctly. I mean, the yellows are excellent at maybe smaller parts of a project plan and effectively executing those smaller pieces of the project plan. Now, the reds got to crack the whip to make it happen, but they get along really well. Now, yellows tend not to get along well with greens. They clash, right? They're sort of a diagonal across from each other in our matrix here that we're building in our minds, because the greens hate slowness and they hate the details, and the yellows love the details and they hate to be rushed. So you can see how that would be a natural clashing point. Okay, what kind of car would a yellow drive? They would drive some sort of incredibly practical car like a Prius or maybe even a Tesla, just because it's so practical and it would never break down and it doesn't use a gas, you blah, blah, blah. It's a very practical car. What kind of dog would they have? I kind of jokingly say they would have a robotic dog or they would not have a dog because having a dog wouldn't necessarily be practical. You have to feed it. You have to board it if you go on a trip somewhere. If they did have a dog, it would be some sort of incredibly practical dog. Whatever a practical dog would be. Maybe a labradoodle or a golden doodle would be incredibly practical because they don't shed and they have very friendly personalities because the lab or the golden that they have in them, and they don't shed because they have poodle in them. I don't know. But that might be the type of dog that they want. Now, let's move on to the blues. The blues are our final quadrant, and they are the passive relationship-oriented people. They love to be liked. Now, they want to be accepted. So this is different from they are nurturers, okay? While the greens are the farmers, while the greens are the hunters of the salespeople, the blues are the farmers. And so they make fantastic account managers. They are your friends, and they will be your friend for life. If you want an amazing friend, be friends with a blue. You can find no better friend than a blue. Now, what kind of car would a blue drive? Well, they would drive some sort of minivan or SUV to bring all their friends along. They'd be like, hey, who wants to drive to such and such? They'll be like, I'll drive everybody in my car. They want to be friends. Okay, what kind of dog would they have? They'd have an incredibly friendly dog. They would have like a Labrador Retriever, or they would have like a Cocker Spaniel, or they would have a Golden Retriever. I mean, these dogs that just lick your face, and they're just so happy to see you. They're constantly wagging their tail. Now, blues, their weaknesses is that they tend to not speak up, and they might have wonderful ideas, but they oftentimes will not share their ideas unless they are asked to share their ideas. So they tend to get run over in meetings and run over in companies, not literally, figuratively. And so there tends to be a clash between reds and blues because the reds tend to run roughshod over them, and the blues, while they don't speak up, their reaction to being run over is to be passive aggressive. So they might just, quote unquote, forget to do something, or quote unquote, forget to invite someone, where in fact that is just them being passive aggressive. Now, in business, you have to maintain relationships within the office. The sort of the official term for blues is the peacemaker. And you got to have peace within a company, and you have to have peace with your customers. So if it wasn't for blues, you would have reds running the place, and it would be all-out war all the time. So blues serve an incredibly important function within an organization. And none of these four quadrants is better or worse than any others. In fact, a successful organization and a successful company need all four. Because if you don't have all four, you're going to be out of balance. And it's also important to know that no one person has all four qualities. Everybody tends to be primary in one of these colors. And yes, they tend to have a secondary color, but they have the primary color that dominates. Now, interestingly, if a person does have a secondary color, oftentimes that secondary color is actually the color that is catty corner, that is polar opposite to them, because they realize that the strength of their color causes a weakness, and that weakness gets them in trouble, and so they then tend to overcompensate by going to the other color. Classic example is the red leader who just run roughshods over everybody, not caring about their feelings, not caring about their inputs, just focusing on getting stuff done, do, win. And then eventually they have a mutiny, and everybody who works for them either quits or is just constantly passive aggressive about everything, and they can't, and eventually the leader can't get anything done because they've worn out their people. So they got to flip-flop over to the blue to nurture those relationships and build them back up. Likewise, the green it's the classic case of the salesperson. Look inside of their car. Oftentimes their car is a mess. Greens tend to be very messy. And sometimes the mess is so bad that it just overwhelms them as a green. And then they'll go on these cleaning organizational sprees where they've had enough and they can't handle the mess and the disorganization, or they get in trouble where they miss a sales meeting, or they miss an important contractual element or something. And it really gets them in trouble. And they're like, whoa, I gotta slow down and I gotta pay attention to the details here. Okay. Likewise, the peacemakers are like, I'm sick and tired and I can't take it anymore. And they start speaking up for themselves. Okay. And the greens are like, hey, it's kind of fun to get out of my shell and to be the life of the party. And so that's a classic example of this is where you'll go to the company Christmas party and all of a sudden the IT people are going crazy. They're like the total social butterflies of the company holiday party because they're coming out of their shell. Okay, so now as a salesperson, you're going to be interacting with all four of these types of people, both in person and virtually, whether it be over the phone or in webinars. And it's important to very consciously, when you're interacting with people, identify what color they are. And in the beginning, you're going to consciously say, this person's a red, this person's a green, this person's a blue. But eventually, you'll get to the point where you can subconsciously do this. And then you will... And what you're going to do is you're going to adapt. You're going to have to be a chameleon. You're going to adapt your conversation to the type of color person that they are. Now, this is obviously a lot easier when you're in one-on-one meetings. Okay, what's some examples of that? You're in a one-on-one meeting with a red. Okay, listen, they are into getting stuff done. They're not into chit-chat. You actually don't chit-chat with a red. Here's how you know they're a red if you don't know them already. Is one, their emails are very short. You come in, you're like, hey, nice weather we're having today. And they're like, I haven't noticed. I've been inside working all day. Okay, so they basically shut you down on your small talk. And that's okay. The point is that if they shut you down on your small talk, it doesn't mean that they're rude. It doesn't mean that you were wrong to start doing the small talk. It just means that they're red and they like to get the business. And so that behooves you to say, okay, let's get started. The purpose of our meeting today is this. They love it when a person tells them a specific purpose, because then what they're going to say is, no, here's my own purpose. So you don't even necessarily want to ask them a question, right? Because then that kind of puts you in a position of subservience. You're going to say, look, the reason for this meeting today is X. And I'm going to go over 1, 2, 3, and 4. Is that in keeping with your expectations? Don't say, is that okay? Again, you want to be on a parallel level with them because you are. And the reason I say that, it's one of the things that I learned from reading sales books, is that power buys from power. And so you do not want to come across weak to a red, because now you have to absolutely be flexible with their desire to be in control. But at the same time, you have to show them that you can assist them in achieving their goal. They're highly utilitarian. So you just need, the entire tone of the meeting is how your product or how your service can be utilitarian in helping them accomplish their goal. Now, when you're in a one-on-one meeting with a green, it's important for you to not talk a lot, because greens like to talk so much that if you're a salesperson, a green will talk themselves into a sale. And this is important because if you are meeting very high up in the company, potentially with the CEO, many CEOs are also greens, because there's a lot of CEOs that have become CEOs through the sales and marketing departments, especially through sales. So the classic example of CEOs is they're either operations people that understand sales. In other words, they're a red that understand sales, or they're salespeople that understand operations. In other words, they're a green that has an understanding and appreciation for reds and yellows. Okay, so just know that if you're meeting with somebody high up and you start getting a CEO that just starts blabbing away, I shouldn't say blabbing, talking away, then like that's okay. And just know that means that they're a green CEO, and you want to let them do the majority of the talking. Let them talk. They will talk their way into convincing them that they should buy your product. They will convince themselves that they should buy your product before you will ever convince them that they will buy their product. So prepare to get interrupted constantly if you're talking to a green, and that's okay. And like there are many sales meetings where I only got through like 3 of my slides, and halfway through the conversation, right? Because greens also don't love details. Halfway through the conversation, they're like, okay, we're gonna do this, and so just know that absolutely will happen. Okay, now the reds and greens do tend to be in the positions of power. They do tend to be in the positions of budgetary control. And that is because of the more active dynamic of their personality. Doesn't always have to be the case. It's just what I have found in my observation. But of course, you're going to have, we talked about the other types of buyers, right? Where you got the economic buyer, the outcome buyer, and the technical buyer. You absolutely will have blues and yellows that are the technical buyer that will have to be interacting with your solution during the implementation and during the ongoing promotion, production, etc. of your service or solution throughout the organization. So those people also have to be understood and communicated with appropriately. So what does that mean? That means with a yellow, it means they're going to ask you a lot of questions, and you need to come prepared with like very specific, detailed answers. Like you got to know your stuff. You got to know your product very well. You got to do your homework. Do not, if you don't know the answer, say, I don't know the answer. I will find out for you, and I will get back to you tomorrow afternoon via email with that answer. And they probably are going to want the answer emailed to them because they don't necessarily want to talk on the phone. Okay? Now, if you get the same sort of question from a blue, you'd be like, hey, I'm going to have the answer for you by tomorrow afternoon. And hey, what's your number? I'll give you a call. And the blues would love that. The blues would love a call back for their answer as opposed to an email. And also the email that you're going to send to the yellow is going to be, very factual email. And if for whatever reason you're going to be sending an email to the blue, you'll be like, hey, John, or hey, Mary, listen, it was great meeting you yesterday. That was really awesome, like learning about the Cocker Spaniel that you have at home. You're going to be very, friendly in that email. Whereas the email to the yellow, it's going to be like bulleted, okay? So the communication style that you have has to vary depending upon who you're talking to from a color perspective. So here is another layer that we are putting on top of all of the different dynamics that we have for people involved in the complex business-to-business sale on the buying committee, right? So we talked about how we have just mentioned it in this podcast, we have the economic buyer, which tends to be somebody like the CFO. We have the outcome buyer, who tends to be somebody like the VP of HR. We have the technical buyer, which would be like the benefits analyst or sometimes even the account manager at the brokerage. And the outcome buyer might actually be the VP of total rewards or the VP of comp and benefits as well, director of comp and benefits, etc. Now, you have to overlay that with the colors that we just talked about, right? With our red, green, yellow, and blue. Then you also have to overlay that on top of the technology adoption life cycle of your early adopters, your pragmatists, your conservatives, and your skeptics. So you have all these different dynamics that you are trying to wade through. And it's hard. And I would say if you get it right half the time, you're ahead of the curve. Like you're better than most other people. And just to be aware of these dynamics in terms of tailoring your answer to their question and tailoring your presentation to them, that gets to the root of sales. And that is where I have seen salespeople fail horribly when they just have like one approach. You have to be a chameleon. You have to have many approaches. You have to have many approaches within the same meeting with different people within that meeting. salespeople that have the same approach every time, regardless of the meeting, regardless of the people, that doesn't work. It fails horribly. That ability, you're essentially on stage and you're an actor or an actress. You have to be highly adaptable. And how long your answers are, how short your answers are, how detailed your answers are, whether you emphasize the employee soft benefits of your solution versus the hard financial benefits of your solution. The reason that this is so important is because of the sort of old sales maxim, telling is not selling. So telling, just getting up there like a talking head, will be unsuccessful. You might have the perfect solution at the perfect time with the perfect group of people. And if you just get up there and spout off like an automaton, it will probably fail. And by selling, what you're doing is you're understanding the specific needs of the specific person, and you are tailoring to the solution that you have to how that solution will meet the specific needs of that specific person. And if you can't do that, they're probably not going to buy. And that is the art and the science of selling. And in my opinion, that is absolutely a skill that can be learned with lots and lots and lots of repetition, which is why in employee benefits, I love small group sales because it gives you a ton of at-bats. Now, if you're a more seasoned salesperson and you know all this, then fine. Go straight for these huge jumbo clients. But if you don't know this yet, then don't even ask for large clients. You don't even want large clients. You don't want large prospects. You don't want large leads. You want as many small leads as humanly possible. If you are a junior salesperson, then you're just like, look, give me all the stuff that you don't want. If you're at an insurance brokerage, take the individual plans. Like, don't even try. I mean, yes, sell group if you want to sell group. Sell individuals. That's the ultimate small group, the individual. So you have to do this over and over and over and over again. And that gets to the other Malcolm Gladwell concept of the 10,000 hours. Now, you can get to 10,000 hours of selling experience. And 10,000 hours is the amount of time that it takes to develop expertise in a certain area. Now, there are different people agree or disagree with this concept, but the point is that, listen, I just think about athletes. They practice and played a ton of games. They practice and play a ton of games. Now, as a salesperson, you got to do the same thing. And the only way you're going to do that, and you can do mock sales stuff within your own company, but the best thing to do is to get out there and have real world experiences and to have a lot of real world experiences. And the absolute best way to do that is in small group. And if your commissions and your income or whatever in the first year or 2 years or 3 years are like low, and you're looking over at, Joe or Jane, and they're getting all these big groups and these big commissions, just know that we're playing for the long haul. We're playing for the long term. We're not playing for 1 season or 2 seasons or 3 seasons. We're playing for a career of highly successful sales that literally would translate into, I had contracts that were over $1 million in annual recurring revenue that I was selling in just the first time I sold my first $1 million deal, I'd probably been a salesperson for 4 years. In the grand scheme of things, that's not that long. I didn't try to sell $1 million deals in year 1, but I worked my way up to it, and so can you. And that's my message for today. Again, this is Dr. Eric Bricker with A Healthcare Z. This is the How to Sell in Healthcare podcast, and I wish you best of luck in your selling.